What happens when a young salesgirl misjudges a man in a leather jacket, only to find out he owns the entire dealership? James stepped into the parking lot of Top Cars, the flagship dealership he had built from scratch. The late morning sun glared down, reflecting off the glossy exteriors of the luxury cars lined up at the front. Each vehicle gleamed as if daring passers-by to stop and admire. But James wasn't here to impress anyone today. He wasn't pulling up in one of his high-end sports cars or luxury sedan. Instead, he arrived in a modest family car, parking it far from the entrance in an unmarked spot. Dressed in a simple leather jacket, plain t-shirt, and worn jeans, James looked more like a curious onlooker than a man who could buy the entire inventory with a single check. His decision to dress down wasn't random. It was deliberate. Today, James wasn't here as the owner. He wanted to observe his team, to see how they treated every customer, not just those who looked the part of a high roller. He knew the true test of his dealership's culture was how they welcomed the unexpected. As he walked toward the entrance, the faint hum of voices drifted through the glass doors. Inside, a few employees gathered near the front desk, their laughter blending with the low murmur of conversation. The showroom buzzed with activity, a mix of customers and staff weaving between rows of pristine cars. James pushed the door open and stepped inside, the cool blast of air conditioning hitting him immediately. The smell of leather, wax, and success filled the room. Bright lights illuminated every corner of the space, highlighting the showroom's meticulous design. The cars sparkled under the overhead lights, each one positioned to exude power, elegance, or speed. With a calm expression, James let his eyes scan the room. He moved with purpose but without urgency, blending into the scene as just another visitor. No one gave him a second glance as he stopped in front of a sleek red sports car. He ran a hand along its polished hood, his mind already switching into observation mode. "Let's see how they treat me today," he thought, adjusting his jacket before turning to look for a sales associate. James stood quietly by the red sports car, his fingers tracing its sleek curves. The car's vibrant finish sparkled under the bright showroom lights, drawing attention like a jewel in a spotlight. Around him, the energy of the dealership buzzed on. Conversations echoed across the floor, sales associates pitching features, customers asking about financing, and the occasional burst of laughter from the front desk. Yet James remained unnoticed, just another face among the crowd. From his vantage point, James observed the staff moving about. Most of them seemed busy, engrossed in their work or in conversations with customers. His eyes settled on a young woman standing at the front desk. Her posture was straight, and she seemed alert, though there was a hint of nervous energy in the way she fidgeted with the edge of her name tag. That was Sarah, one of the dealership's newest hires. James remembered approving her application just weeks ago, impressed by her enthusiasm during the interview. Sarah had been eager to prove herself, and today it seemed she was looking for an opportunity to do just that. From across the showroom, Sarah's eyes caught James by the sports car. Her brow furrowed slightly as she studied him. His casual attire, a leather jacket, plain t-shirt, and jeans, didn't scream luxury buyer. He wasn't dressed like the typical clientele who came in for the high-end models. Her training had emphasized confidence and treating every customer with care, but she couldn't help the small voice of doubt creeping into her mind. "He's probably just browsing," Sarah thought to herself. "Maybe here to look at cars he can't afford." But her manager's words from earlier echoed in her head. "Treat everyone like they're your most important customer. First impressions are everything." Steeling herself, Sarah adjusted her blazer, grabbed a clipboard, and headed toward James. As Sarah approached, James pretended not to notice her right away. He wanted to see how she would handle the interaction, whether she would be warm and professional or fall into the trap of assumptions. When she finally spoke, her tone was polite but cautious. "Hello, sir," she began, offering a practiced smile. "Can I help you with anything today?" James turned to face her, his expression friendly. "I'm just looking around for now," he said, his voice calm and inviting. Sarah's gaze flicked to the car beside him, the striking red sports car that seemed to capture everyone's attention. Her smile faltered slightly as she hesitated. She wasn't sure how to proceed. Most customers who were serious about this model usually came in dressed to impress, exuding a certain air of confidence. James's understated demeanor threw her off balance. "That's one of our premium models," Sarah said finally, nodding toward the car. It's on the higher end of the price range. If you'd like, I could show you some options that might be more budget-friendly." James raised an eyebrow at her suggestion, but kept his expression neutral. "I'm interested in this one," he said, keeping his tone measured. "Could you tell me more about it?" Sarah hesitated again. She wasn't fully prepared to give an in-depth pitch about the premium models. Her training had focused more on the mid-range vehicles, the ones that sold the most. She fumbled with her clipboard, trying to recall the key features of the car. "Well," she started, her voice wavering slightly, "it's a high-performance vehicle with, great handling and speed. It's really popular with people who like fast cars." James nodded, waiting patiently for her to continue. The silence stretched a little too long. Sarah felt her confidence slipping further. Maybe he's just wasting time, she thought. Trying to regain control of the situation, she added, "Most people who are serious about this model already know everything about it. Are you sure this is the one you're looking for?" Her tone, though polite, carried an edge of impatience. She meant to come across as professional, but James could sense the subtle shift in her attitude. He let her words hang in the air for a moment before responding. "I'm sure," he said simply, his calm demeanor unchanged. Inside, James couldn't help but feel a twinge of disappointment. Sarah's nervousness was understandable. She was new, after all, but her assumptions about him were beginning to show. This was exactly the kind of moment he had come here to observe. James's calm response, "I'm sure," lingered in the air, a subtle challenge Sarah hadn't expected. She shifted her weight awkwardly, her clipboard held a little tighter now. Her nerves were starting to creep back, and she could feel the cracks in her confidence growing. Sarah's eyes darted briefly to the car beside them, then back to James. Why isn't he saying more? She wondered, her mind racing to fill the uncomfortable silence. Her training had focused on initiating conversations, building trust, and confidently presenting the features of a vehicle. But this wasn't going how she'd imagined it. "Well," she began again, her voice lifting slightly as she gestured toward the red sports car, "this model is a real head-turner. It's designed for performance, with advanced handling and a powerful engine. Perfect for someone who enjoys driving fast." She ended the sentence with a weak smile, hoping he'd pick up on her enthusiasm. James nodded slowly, his expression neutral. "Sounds impressive," he replied. "What's under the hood?" Sarah hesitated, blinking at the unexpected question. Under the hood? She wasn't entirely sure. Her training had touched on specifications like horsepower and engine types, but the exact details of this high-end model escaped her. "Well," she stalled, glancing at her clipboard, "it has a high-performance engine. I'd have to check the exact specs for you." James tilted his head slightly, watching her closely. He wasn't trying to intimidate her, but the cracks in her preparation were showing. Sarah felt her cheeks flush as she rushed to pivot. "You know," she said, taking a small step back and straightening her blazer, "most people who are interested in a car like this already know a lot about it. They've usually done their research beforehand." James's eyebrows lifted slightly at her comment, but he said nothing. His silence, calm yet steady, felt heavier than any words might have. Sarah, realizing how her words might have sounded, pressed on quickly. "Not that you wouldn't know," she added hurriedly, her tone becoming a little defensive. "It's just, it's a specific kind of car. Maybe there's another model that would suit your needs better?" Her words hung in the air, and this time James didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, he let it stretch, his calm gaze unwavering. Inside, he felt a twinge of disappointment. It wasn't the lack of knowledge that bothered him. Sarah was new, and he understood the learning curve. What stung was the subtle assumption layered in her words. Before Sarah could say more, James tilted his head slightly and asked, "What do you think someone like me would need?" The question landed like a stone in her chest. Sarah blinked, caught completely off guard. Her thoughts scrambled for an answer, but none came. "I didn't mean it like that," she stammered after a beat, her voice trembling slightly. "I just thought, maybe a different option would be more practical for someone who's, She trailed off, realizing she was only digging herself deeper. James stayed silent, his expression unreadable. Sarah felt her heart racing now, the pressure mounting as she realized the weight of her words. At that moment, the sound of firm footsteps broke the tension. Sarah glanced up to see Tom, her manager, walking toward them. His pace was brisk and his expression was a mix of concern and forced composure. "James," Tom called out, his voice warm but tinged with nervousness. He extended a hand as he reached them, his posture immediately shifting to one of respect. James turned to Tom with a small, polite smile. "Tom," he said, his voice steady as ever. Sarah blinked in confusion, looking between the two men. "Wait," she said softly, her voice barely audible. "You know him?" Tom's gaze shifted to Sarah, and for a brief moment, there was an almost imperceptible flicker of unease in his eyes. He straightened his shoulders and nodded. "Sarah," he said carefully, "meet James. He's the owner of Top Cars." The words hit Sarah like a freight train. Her breath caught, and the color drained from her face. "Oh, no," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I didn't know. I'm so sorry." James didn't reply immediately. He glanced at Sarah, his expression still calm but now tinged with something unreadable. Perhaps disappointment, perhaps understanding. "Let's take a moment," he said finally, his voice measured. He gestured toward the corner of the showroom where a few employees had started to notice the exchange. "Tom, let's talk over there." Tom nodded quickly, shooting Sarah a glance before motioning for her to follow. The weight of the moment settled heavily on her as she reluctantly fell in step behind them, her mind racing with regret and embarrassment. James led the way to a quieter corner of the showroom, where a sleek black SUV was on display. Tom walked beside him, his steps slightly hurried, while Sarah followed a few paces behind, her heart pounding. She could feel her cheeks burning with embarrassment and couldn't stop replaying her earlier words in her mind. When they reached the SUV, James stopped and turned to face both of them. His calm demeanor hadn't wavered, but there was a weight to his silence that made Sarah feel even smaller. "Sarah," James began, his voice even but firm, "I appreciate that you came to help me today." Sarah swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. "Thank you, sir," she said quietly. "But I noticed something," James continued, tilting his head slightly. "You made a few assumptions about me, didn't you?" Sarah's eyes widened. She felt the words land heavily, but she knew he was right. I didn't mean to," she stammered. "I was just trying to help." James nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I believe that," he said. "But let me ask you this. When you saw me standing by that red sports car, what did you think?" Sarah hesitated, her hands gripping the edges of her clipboard tightly. She wanted to lie, to say she hadn't thought anything, but she knew he would see through it. "I thought," she began, her voice trembling. "I thought you might not be serious about buying it. I'm sorry. I know that was wrong." James didn't respond right away. He glanced at Tom, who was standing silently before looking back at Sarah. "It's not just about being wrong," James said. "It's about missing an opportunity to treat someone the right way. What if I had been a first-time visitor, someone who really wanted to buy that car but needed help to understand its value? How would I feel if I thought you weren't taking me seriously?" Sarah felt a lump forming in her throat. "You're right," she said softly. I didn't think about it that way. James's voice softened slightly. We all make mistakes, he said. What matters is learning from them. Tom, who had been watching the exchange, decided it was time to step in. Sarah, he said, his tone gentle but firm, James built this dealership on one core value: respect. Respect for our customers, for our team, and for the work we do. It doesn't matter what someone looks like or how they're dressed. Every person who walks through that door deserves to be treated like they belong here. Sarah nodded quickly, her eyes fixed on the floor. I understand, she said. I'll do better. I promise. James studied her for a moment, his gaze unreadable. Then, to her surprise, he smiled. I believe you will, he said. That's why we're having this conversation. Mistakes are part of growth, but you have to be willing to change. Sarah looked up at him, relief mixing with determination. Thank you, she said. I won't let this happen again.